Okay, thank you for everyone waiting for just a moment as we got all our PowerPoints set up. My name is Sarah Wyatt. I am a biodiversity specialist at the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today to an event we're holding with our Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group on Indigenous peoples, land rights, and the GEF. We're going to hear from a variety of subjects related to Indigenous peoples. And I think we're going to have a really nice just panel and discussion and hopefully some time for conversation as we finish up. So I'd like to invite all the panelists up. Just come on up, Giovanni. So we're going to have a nice, this is a good friendly group of people, and hopefully this really is a conversation about some of the real challenges that we have as global financing mechanisms and some of the work that we are doing to get money on the ground, and why does that matter? Why is it effective to work that way? And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Lucy Mulenkei. Lucy is Maasai from Kenya. She's co-chair of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. She's also chair of our Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group. I think she has about 15 other titles. I don't know how she does everything that she does. And so I will hand it over to her to chat a bit about what we've been doing with the IPAG. It's been 10 years that the IPAG has existed. Yeah, so since we took the decision as part of our principles and guidelines for engagement with Indigenous peoples to create the IPAG. And so we are kind of looking back and looking forward to what's to come. So with that, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and welcome to you all. And it's really great to be speaking here. And we are speaking here just like partners. It's not like a big issue because Terence from the Small Grants Program has been quite a long time, Small Grants Program has been a long time friend of Indigenous peoples, and the rest of my colleagues here from the Indigenous communities have also been working quite a lot of, doing a lot of work. And Sarah, thank you for Global Environment Facility because this was a really important venture in terms of including Indigenous people and starting to work with them closely. Because for many years, Indigenous people were saying, no, GEF is not helping us. They have the money. We don't know where the money goes. We can't access that money and so on. And so when there was a discussion and the council approved that we can have the Indigenous People Advisory Group, it was very good because we were able now to tackle the issues quite closely and look at the different issues that impact on Indigenous peoples. And we started a journey. You say 10 years, but we see like it's about 15, but also we see like it's a journey that we have taken. And this journey has really come up to bring, good fruits because it has made an impact and also has been able to help Indigenous people move a step forward and start understanding the GEF very clearly. So when we started working with the Global Environment Facility very closely, we were able to come up with the different issues. What were the issues that were impacting on Indigenous people? Of course, funding was the first thing, and it was the main goal that we needed this money, and how to get it, we did know how to get it. Because at the same time, there was quite a long, regulation, protocols, and so on. And that one alone is something that discourages Indigenous people to be told, bring this, do that, you have to go through this, you have to do that. Because in the small grants program, which they had been used to, it was a bit easier in terms of you can even submit a video or do a simple proposal. But at the same time, maybe it needed this time to really see and focus. And then at the same time, we were talking about capacity building because we needed it. And we needed to make sure that at least we understand and be able to see how we can build the capacity of Indigenous peoples and local communities whom we work with. There was also the issue of making sure that we also have partnership with other CSOs, civil society, and looking at issues of gender and also the program of work of GEF so that we understand it wholly and they also understand us. And indeed, we discussed a lot and we were able to come up and we moved another step ahead because at least we were able to fundraise and get some funding that helped Indigenous people realize the potential that they can move on to taking activities that are very important to them, like what we are discussing today, issues of land rights and GEF, and also other issues which are very crucial. And when we look at land rights, we also look at the different landscapes, not only one particular area, simply because Indigenous people live in different landscapes. We have in Africa, we have people who live in the dry lands. Most of the, for example, my country, Kenya, is 80% semi-arid, it's dry. And if you go to some other areas like DRC, Congo, you have a forest, you have all canopy just like you are in Brazil. And then when you go to other places like the Philippines and others, it's water. So we have different, ecosystems that really, we wanted also GEF to understand us and also to be able to pick up on that. So we took a journey that, as I mentioned, that is really a journey that has helped us to be able to get that money that we were looking for. And then when we got that, we have called it Inclusive Conservation Initiative, which is very, very important for us. The council was able to approve in its GEF 7, which is a process whereby they give their funding and so on. So those of you who are close to GEF know how they do it. And we were able to get good funding to fund quite a number of projects, nine projects, which are also different from different ecosystems. And you won't believe the urge that Indigenous people had, because Sarah will tell you we had over 400 applications. And out of that, to try and come down to a number of the proposal that could be funded was something incredible that we were able to really make it. So we have taken this journey and we are not stopping. We are still going to push Global Environment Facility. We are going to keep them as our partners. We are going to continue working to make sure that at least they, every time they do any allocation or any discussions on funding, they can remember that they have partners who need to be funded. Issues of land rights are very close to Indigenous people because they are also very sensitive, and they are things, it's something that is within, because it's part of our culture. It could be land, it could be our territories, whatever you want to call it. It could be the waters that belong to Indigenous people and so on. And it's very, very sensitive because in most of the areas, that's where Indigenous people keep on reminding governments that recognize us, recognize our rights. Because without the land that belongs to us and the nature that is within them, the natural resources and other resources in our lands are very crucial. And we keep on emphasizing that. That's why we are here discussing and looking forward for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework to ensure that we as Indigenous peoples, our local communities and other stakeholders who are from different areas could also be able to be involved in terms of looking at what activities and how we are going to implement the global framework. So we are all collectively working together. At the same time, we are here also to make sure that the governments understand us and the parties, and and the other partners, like you, like the Global Environment Facility, see how we have been trying to do the advocacy and lobbying and negotiations and making sure that at least we can be able to ensure that people understand and know what are the issues that are very close to us. Even when discussing about protected areas and everything, we always say, first of all, respect our rights so that we can be able to discuss the next steps that we are going to do. Okay? So I think I'll stop here, Sarah, because I've taken a bit of more time, but we'll open up the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, and it's always great to hear from you and reminding us, it's you make steps forward, but there's still a long way to go. And so I think we're always trying to get better and do more in this regard. So next we're going to hear from Giovanni Reyes. Giovanni, can you introduce yourself so I get all your titles as well?
Okay, I'm Giovanni Reyes. I belong to the Kankanaey Igorot tribe of the highlands of northern Luzon in the Philippines. I am the current president of the Philippine ICCA Consortium, and I have been with my colleague here, Lucy, since 2016. And the, the project that GEF funded in the Philippines from 2016 to 2019 was a large-scale project with a medium-scale project budget, but which exceeded the targets. And we can say that it's due to the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples that the cost effectiveness of the project took its form. And initially, the project was to expand the protected area systems. But indigenous peoples intervened and said that, wait a minute, 75% of our key biodiversity areas are within our territories. Where are you going to expand your protected area? So we recalibrated the expansion from protected areas to recognition of indigenous peoples' territories. And the means by which we applied indigenous knowledge was to transform indigenous knowledge about the extents of their territories, about their knowledge of their boundaries, into its physical form, into its physical dimension in the form of 3D models. So we have an evidence-based position to show government that this is a tenurial instrument via mapping. Indigenous peoples have very high level of knowledge about their territory because of course, we all know that the spiritual and cultural values that they attach on these lands are the reasons why they are very close to these lands. So that the landmarks, sequences of landmarks, the route, the navigation and knowledge about the route it makes them the most effective. What is this? A ranger type, the more effective. Rangers, because you need not pay them to provide guardianship over their territories. So so in this high level awareness among the communities, they will point out the names, historical places of their territories and their significance in terms of spiritual and cultural values, and then they would articulate it to government, saying that this is our local version of reality. And in terms of biodiversity levels, when you compare it to protected area systems, it's quite high. The level of the biodiversity is high. And so this is the map that guided our GEF project from 2016 to 2019, and it pushed the government. It pushed the Philippine government at the forefront of inclusive conservation. And of course, when we combine indigenous knowledge and science, initially there was this idea that maybe we cannot mix our indigenous knowledge with science, but we thought that a rights-based approach would merge the two clashing values together to empower biodiversity. And that is through the recognition of the governance systems of indigenous peoples. Okay, so let's proceed to the next. So apart from mapping would be the indigenous peoples' knowledge about the species in their territory. They know if the forest is sick or not. They're able to examine if the state of health of forest is sick or not. In the inventory of resources, they would identify plants and animal species that have invaded the area. They would identify keystone species as they relate to their history of indigenous activity. And they would present this to government and say that these areas may need, if it is sick, then it may need assistance from government. But if it is healthy, then still the support would be required. Next. it's all participatory. So the 10 sites in the ICCAs in the Philippines, the the target of 100,000 hectares exceeded to 148,000 hectares. Uh, and when we had this analyzed by our colleagues at the World Resource Institute in Washington, they said that the areas which we mapped is able to hold 10.5 million tons of carbon, or equivalent to the gas emissions of 7 million cars a year. That is the capacity of an indigenous people's territory to mitigate at least the grave impact of climate change. Um, we have here the contributions of indigenous peoples in terms of biodiversity and climate change, which we need to make visible globally. Next. I think that's the last. Okay, so that's my presentation, Sarah.
Yeah, Giovanni, that we're actually going to be working together on a good practice brief from the GEF to talk about this project in particular, because it really did make such a difference, and particularly if you may know some of the headwinds that Indigenous peoples faced in the Philippines during that time, they still continued to move on and maintain maintain the work that they did. So I'm looking at the boss man. I'm wondering if I can call on the CEO of the GEF, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, to say a few words about why he is taking time from running around all over the place and wants to talk about the importance of working with Indigenous peoples and some of kind of his lessons and thoughts on why this issue is really one to focus on.
Thank you, Sarah. And probably a very quick question to Giovanni. Are in your efforts protecting the Philippine eagle? The Philippine eagle is part of the indigenous territories and being protected through this initiative. I want to hear if that is correct and accurate, Giovanni.
Yes, indeed. The habitat of the Philippine eagle is considered a part of the ICCA of the Manobos. And indigenous peoples do not look at the bird as just simply a bird or an endangered species. They look at the eagle as a stakeholder, because through many years of interaction with the eagle, they can understand the language or the signs of the eagle's way of informing them that a danger is on its way, either a weather disturbance, or either. That is why they protect its habitat, and that's how they relate with the Philippine eagle. They see it as a stakeholder and not just a bird.
Well, this is very interesting, and that this is not the first time I hear Giovanni talking about the Philippine eagle. And I did this question to reinforce an issue which is extremely important, which is the fact that working through communities, indigenous groups, give us different approaches on how we do a different conservation efforts, and also being able to generate higher impacts. The other element that is extremely important is that we talk about, carbon offsetting. Over here? Yes. Okay. Carbon offsetting and the COP benefits. And I want once and for all get rid of this term of COP. Seems. Hello? Seems there's. We need to really overcome this concept of the COP and carbon actions. So, right now? And this is relevant because we've been talking about co-benefits in terms of biodiversity conservation and human well-being, as opposed to really concentrating one for all in the very specific targets, which are human well-being and biodiversity. Because the real opportunity to, let me over here, right next to you. Good. See, Funny that it's not working. Okay, seems like. This COP, I was saying, this COP can give us the real opportunity to really overcome the concept of carbon offsetting and carbon credits, and really doing a comprehensive approach towards the recognition of all environmental services being by conservation and restoration. I don't know, probably to turn them off all. Hello? Now we go. So my point was that working with the local communities and indigenous groups was the microphone though?
It's just you.
So more, I will try to elaborate my point once more. This COP is all about mobilizing. Yes? Okay, I was saying once more, I'll try to do it slowly, that this COP is all about mobilizing resources, optimizing resources, and having impact. Seems like
He's trying to get some up for you right now.
so this I haven't been able to be here to share with our partners and stakeholders because I've been in the contact groups, and it is really worrisome that here today, even though all the science and the evidence on how good integrated conservation can be done, negotiators are conditioning biodiversity action to more resources. And yes, I can understand that those more resources are needed and important. But here, the GEF and our partners has proven that there are innovative ways by which we can not only mobilize resources, financial resources, but also, very importantly, generate higher impacts by engaging with non-state actors. When we talk about the GEF, we normally say that the GEF works with countries, but that is not true. We don't work with countries. These are countries. These are the countries. We work with the governments of the countries. And the GEF needs to move towards a mechanism by which we can work with all different stakeholders. Yes, non-state actors are extremely important. And even though the GEF has been working for more than 30 years with civil society through the small grant program, the GEF needs to do much better. And this is why the GEF is committed to put up to 10% of their financial resources in the hands of non-state actors by 2030. Today, we only mobilize less than 1% of the GEF resources with non-state actors. So if we want to really have an impact within the conventions, let me see. Oh, much better. If we really want to have an impact within the conventions, where we will do a system change on how we relate with nature, in a system change in how we produce our energy, where we live, how do we generate how do we produce our food. We need to really understand that the GEF needs to invest with all different stakeholders at the country level. And yes, we work with the executive branch, with the governments, and we do little with non-state actors. The the experiences that we've had with the indigenous groups and local communities has shown us a path, a way by which we can really generate access to finance, and this is a good example of direct access, by which we can prove that this does works. And in this context, I think that this initiative is helping us to really understand how do we play a major role with non-state actors. And this is extremely important. The recent GEF replenishment that we went through early this year was a good example of how countries has understood that without a strategic long-term investment with non-state actors, we can be able to achieve the goals of the Climate Convention, the Land Degradation, the Biodiversity Convention, and the other conventions related to chemicals and waste. So for us at the GEF, it's extremely important that this pilot that we have here, the Inclusive Conservation Initiative, is something that we can replicate. And I hope that by next year in the GEF Assembly, we can announce a couple of other interesting similar initiatives like this one, where the GEF will be providing direct access and finance to non-state actors. And we are working on this. So this is much more than a pilot. This is a new way of engaging and working with non-state actors. I don't fear anymore any political pushback from governments, because I don't see that pushback coming from governments in terms of GEF being a major source of finance to non-state actors. So here we got a group of friends and colleagues that are the pioneers of something that the GEF looks beyond 2030, which is a financial mechanism that strategically and sustainably support the governments and non-state actors. Otherwise, the pace of action of working through government is very slow, and we will never be able to support them in their aspiration for a nature-positive, carbon-neutral, pollution-free world. So today I want to really highlight the fact that these are the pioneers. This is a very interesting pilot. And even though the scale of what we are doing here is relatively high compared to other things that are happening, this is just a pilot of what the GEF should be doing. The GEF should be financing the woman, should be financing the youth, should be financing other relevant stakeholders that are just there looking at the GEF in a very traditional manner. So this is relevant and super important for all of us. And I look forward to have the advice on how this model can be replicated so the GEF can be there providing similar mechanisms to other very important stakeholders when we talk about civil society. So thank you so much, Sarah. Yes, of course.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and thank you again for bringing this particular discussion. And one thing that is important for us indigenous people, we've been able to discuss with you even before you came to GEF, which is very crucial. But I just wanted to ask you a little bit and for you to comment on issues of land rights for indigenous peoples, because that's where the main problem is that's where we start the issues of indigenous people feeling like we are excluded, we are not recognized, we are marginalized. What's your view on that? And if the money that, the funding that GEF is putting in, where do you think is the real priority, even though indigenous people themselves have to put in their priorities? But what's your view on that, especially on land rights?
Well, I think that land rights is just the tip of the iceberg, because there are other rights which are relevant and important, and I would like to include here the rights associated to the ownership of the biological resources, who owns the forest, who owns the biodiversity, and let me go even deeper. Who owns the genetic and biochemical resources allocated in those? So if we see the Nagoya Protocol, we need to see this partnership working in implementing the Nagoya Protocol, whereby indigenous communities are there in the center of that discussion. 80% of the countries that have subscribed the Nagoya Protocol hasn't done the domestic work of doing the legal frameworks that responds directly to the Nagoya Protocol. So I think that is more just than the redemption process of the land rights, which is in the center of what you do, and I'm so happy to see the portfolio of projects where you are using that. So the GEF is a financial partner, and you are the ones who take the decision on how to invest those priorities. I mean, this new model is extremely interesting because of that. The GEF is not here to present a recipe on how to deal with indigenous issues and local communities. And yes, of course, I understand that land rights is crucial into this. But the approach should be more comprehensive. Who owns the carbon credits? I ask myself. You know, if you ask the government says we are the government. But then we need to look into a specific legal regulations. And this is where I think this initiative can help us creating some, I would say, standards that we can socialize within other nations, other regions, where we can have a more integrated approach. So the lands right, yes, is relevant, but lands right should be joined by a comprehensive approach where we can define once and for all the rights associated not only to knowledge, but also to the management of biological resources. I'm talking about the biochemical and genetic resources associated to that. The GEF model, I think, is inclusive, as the name says, and it relies a lot on the decision of the partners on how to do the proper investment. And I think that it is not just the tip of the iceberg, but you are the pioneers of a new reality, of a new work. That's why we need to see this as a pilot, but at the same time as an entry point to getting into a situation where the GEF can be looking at the country level and feeling proud that we are working with all stakeholders, government, civil society, private sector.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think this, when you mention Nagoya Protocol, is very special to us because this is the same protocol that has been guiding indigenous peoples and their local communities on issues of biocultural protocols to put back their culture, their traditional institutions in place and to be able to understand some of the process. So I'm very happy that that is brought up. And I think this is something that will continue, you know, creating more awareness, building the capacity, and ensuring that our indigenous people really do understand. And the ones who are already beneficiaries of this particular inclusive conservation, I think that is one of the guide that is guiding them in terms of looking at different issues. But I would also like to give my colleagues, if, in case there is one who would like to ask some question, some input. Ray, do you want to bring back the eagle?
Of course, it's not only the eagle that are seen by indigenous peoples as an important or a key stakeholder. When you talk about the eagle, then you have to talk also about the tribe that protects its habitat. The reason why they thrive and persist is because of that protection. That spiritual and cultural values that they attach over the eagle is one that you have to identify also these people when you talk about the eagle. In the same way as there is this buffalo, small dwarf buffalo, which is considered by government as an endangered species. No one knows that the reason why they thrive is because the Mangyan tribe, for example, consider the territory of these dwarf buffaloes as the ritual site. They do ritual site. That's why when you say buffalo, when you say Tamarao, then you must also mention the name of the tribe whose values are attached also on that animal. We can see here the very clear relationship of indigenous communities with the plant and animal species and the reasons for their protection. That makes them the actual and real rangers of the mountains around them. And that is why it is persistent that the waters continue to flow and supply agricultural lands with water so that these lands can provide rice to the farmers, and the farmers can sell it to the nation. So it's related to cultural values, food sovereignty, and food security. And if you recognize that right, then we can escalate the practice.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Guadalupe Yesenia Hernandez Marquez, Zapotec people, from the Zapotec people in Mexico. And you asked for us for some advice, but maybe we can advise with our examples and how we work with the GEF at the local level, obviously with our governments. I don't know if we can share some slides, or is the next, huh? Oh, okay. Yeah?
He gave
No,
a.
but continue, Guadalupe.
Okay, thank you. Okay, very fast. The reason because why I'm here is because I want to share with you two things. In the Nagoya Protocol and GEF project for Mexico, one important component was to develop biocultural protocols, and we developed the first microregional biocultural protocols to ensure rights to territory for indigenous peoples and one local community. But also we can to advocate to put the biocultural protocols recognition at the local constitution in Oaxaca, Mexico. And this was in all the GEF effort to promote and to enhance the capacities for the implementation of Nagoya Protocol. This is amazing because we have the recognition. I don't know if we can go to one of the last slides where the law is. Please, more. Sorry, it's not a class. It's like a class. More, please. This is the background. More, please. More. No, before. This. No, before. This is the wording in the local constitution, recognizing the biocultural protocols as a right of indigenous peoples, as a right to ensure our historical memory and for our lands, territories, resources, etc., etc. And he is my friend Noé Doroteo, the deputy that he pushed for this at the local deputy chamber. And this is great, and I would like to inspire to all of you to do the same, because we need to having our laws in our national constitutions, local laws, those rights, those rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, to first to develop our rules, and secondly, to know the global and national arena and rules, laws, agreements to ensure our rights to our territory. And thanks so very much.
Muchas gracias, Guadalupe, and Guadalupe, Giovanni, Lucy, Terence, Sarah, thanks. Today, we are in the crossroads nowadays. The science is clear. Unfortunately, on the other rooms right next to us, seems like the science doesn't make any echo at all. And the GEF and many other multilateral mechanisms are really being questioned by parties. And I see a big threat of fragmentation. Fragmentation and working on silos is one of our biggest challenges. So the full alignment of domestic investment, ODA, private sector investment, is extremely critical. And I here have a bunch of good friends who can give testimony of the real honest efforts of the GEF to really have an impact, to really work with the local stakeholder as we continue to pursue our effort of more political coherence at the country level. I wish I had the power at the GEF to condition the way we finance governments, and that unfortunately is not a reality, because it will be super important that the GEF resource becomes a positive incentive for coherence. Coherence means respecting rights. Coherence means respecting protected areas of oil and gas and extractive activities. Coherence means building on what governments has been doing as they change throughout time. But we have learned that the best way, because that other option of conditioning GEF access resources to government for more coherence and more sustainability is in no way, politically speaking, the most smart manner to generate that is to working with the local stakeholders. And even though this may seem as a long shot, as a long way forward, this is the right thing to do. And I want to convey this message to you all. This is the right thing to do. GEF feels very proud of what we do with the local communities, the CSO, with the small grant program, with the many other things that we do. But we're just putting less than 1% of the GEF resources in non-state actors. For me, that is not acceptable in the terms of my interpretation of the mandate that we have at the GEF. That is not acceptable. So I look beyond the projects that you're doing. Lucy, you're talking to me about land rights. Yes, fabulous. But I look beyond that. I look as I look at you all as a breakthrough in a new paradigm of what the GEF should be doing. The GEF should be working with mayors at the city level with direct access without going through any minister, the same way we're doing with you guys. And I think that that's one of the most compelling messages that I want to convey today. We need to be guided by people who are doing the groundbreaking processes here. So please maintain in your mind what I just said with regards to the GEF considering not acceptable that we cannot go beyond what we do with non-state actors, and help us all as we are in the negotiations. So we can push for that language, we can push for that vision, we can push for that commitment from the main recipient and donors of the GEF. So thank you so much. Good luck. Looking forward, GEF 8 will be another good opportunity to provide support and funding to this initiative. And you all have a huge responsibility, because it's not just fulfilling the expectation of Inclusive Conservation Initiative, it's guiding the GEF towards a new paradigm on how we work with non-state actors. Muchas gracias. Gracias, Terence. Thanks, Lucy.
So as I said, we wanted a conversation. I think we got a bit more of a conversation than we were planning on, which is great. And so I'm going to look back at our agenda a little bit, and just, I think what would help is to just say a few words about what the Inclusive Conservation Initiative is. You may have heard a whole bunch of references to it. But this is an initiative, and we have at least two of our partners here as part of the Inclusive Conservation Initiative. They're sitting there hiding in the back. So the Inclusive Conservation Initiative was something that we developed as part of GEF 7. And it really was trying to respond to this issue that we saw, that oftentimes it's the governments who receive the support from the GEF. And it's not the Indigenous peoples. It's not the people actually doing the work on the ground, right, who are receiving the support. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to skip some of the background. We all know Indigenous peoples are incredibly important. Next slide. I can actually do this, huh? Yeah. Okay, so what we have as part of the Inclusive Conservation Initiative, which is providing $25 million to support Indigenous-led conservation, and the program itself is being directed by Indigenous peoples. So Lucy, for instance, was part of the interim steering committee, and Giovanni, right? They were part of the interim steering committee that helped design the program. They were part of every step of the way. I was coming to you. Okay, now we got to do this. Now we have to score the proposals. Now we have to do these things. And we worked through this process. And we had as someone mentioned, over 400 proposals for direct on-the-ground work led by Indigenous communities and Indigenous peoples. And so we had quite a process, but selected 9 of those. If anyone here has some money they'd like to throw around, I can send you some great projects. We'd love to have you come join us. We have GEF 8, the next round of funding, coming around. We're still figuring out how exactly that's going to look. But then we're also supporting capacity building in a variety of forms for Indigenous organizations and Indigenous peoples, including youth, women, various areas there. Supporting the voice of Indigenous peoples here in fora like this, in international policy making. The GEF supports, or the GEF is a financial mechanism for 5 different multilateral agreements, including one on mercury pollution, for example, and they're really getting going on working with Indigenous peoples, and actually that's been an activity for the IPAG, is trying to work with that program. It's a little different, but has quite an effect on biodiversity as well. And then also trying to bring together knowledge on how these activities work and how we can actually be most effective, which is working with these type of communities. And so and not just limiting our knowledge generation and sharing to the groups that we're working with or to the projects that we have. There's a lot of good work going on out there, and the idea is to bring that together. So what makes ICI different, it was catalyzed out of a paper completed by our IPAG. They were there with every step of the process. The governance of the program is by Indigenous peoples. I'm trying to see if this is, and we have heard the call routinely for direct access to GEF financing. And maybe some people say GEF is hard to get access to, but what I can say is that the Indigenous organizations that are part of the ICI are receiving financing and working with the GEF just as any government works with the GEF, which is exciting in that way too. We have projects that span 12 countries. I'm trying to remember, 9 sub-projects. If I could I'm going to call on Lorena, coming from our project in Futomahuitza in Argentina and Chile, which is exciting too because that's an area that has received pretty little support, honestly, globally for Indigenous peoples, and it's a binational project. So Indigenous peoples don't necessarily follow international boundaries, and that's something else we were able to do with this project. We also have Payne back there from Tanzania, who's leading some great work, including helping communities claim their land rights and claim their conservancies in their areas. And there's great stories to go with all of this, and we have a whole, I think I counted, it was 18 organizations that we're working with. You can see all their logos, very small, down at the bottom. I'm working across different landscapes, drylands, oceans, forest, and everything kind of in between. And so you can follow us in everything that we're doing, and we're working to this is our first step in trying to transform conservation, both funding and practice. So I tried to do that very quickly. As I talk about that, I don't know if Terence, you'd like to, if I can call on you, or I know that I'm also looking at, I asked one of the audience members, looking at him. Okay, I did ask one of our audience members. Can I call on you after that kind of whole craziness? So Jeff Griffin leads the GEF unit at the Food and Agriculture Organization. And so I asked him to just talk a little bit about some of the work that they're doing, because the work of the GEF with Indigenous peoples is about much more than the Inclusive Conservation Initiative. I would say the probably vast majority of our work with Indigenous peoples is outside of the Inclusive Conservation Initiative. And so I was hoping he could talk some about that and some of his lessons learned or whatever. So would you like to come up and say a couple words, Jeff? I'm always trying to bring new people into our conversation when I see them. So.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everybody. So it's great to be up here with you all. Thank you. Well, you know, let me just say something about land tenure, then we can talk about what we're doing. You know, I think all of us who've been working on GEF project design and implementation for so many years we all understand how important land tenure is, right? It's critical to effective environmental action by Indigenous peoples, by local communities, by all stakeholders, really. And FAO, even beyond its GEF work, of course, understands clearly that land tenure is crucial to sustainable agriculture, sustainable agri-food systems, whether they're in indigenous lands or in other areas. And that's one reason why FAO, it was 10 years ago, promulgated the voluntary guidelines on land tenure. And in fact, just this year, they celebrated the 10th anniversary of these guidelines, which have 5 foundational principles and a whole range of guidelines on what can be done to improve land tenure. And of course, one of the key principles is respect for tenure rights, land rights, and others. So those are things we work into many, or if not all, of our GEF projects, really, because at the end of the day, our GEF work is all about helping people do things differently, and it's hard to do that if the land tenure situation isn't clear or is unstable. And I can think of a project right now. Sarah and I just spoke 30 minutes ago about me getting up here, so this is off the cuff, but we have a very interesting project in Nicaragua, for example, working with Indigenous peoples in their lands which have been invaded by people from outside, right? And so that may be a situation where the indigenous land rights are clear, but they're not enforced. And so it's a complicated situation. Every situation is different. But that's something certainly that can be a real challenge in many places. So those are just some thoughts off the cuff. Thank you.
Well, it's always good to hear one of the big UN agencies. I get to say that land rights and land tenure are really important. That's actually a focus, an increased focus within the new Inclusive Conservation Initiative that, we decided to really highlight that issue in terms of being kind of the base issue, because I think it's really hard for many of us to understand just how challenging the situation can be for Indigenous groups, where they have to go through all kinds of process. Even if there's a good law in place, you have to go through all these processes. You have to hire lawyers, know the process. I'm thinking of Kenya, where you have to hold an election, you have to have a board, you have to get registered, you have to process all these materials, and you're dealing with people who are very remote, and don't necessarily have the knowledge and the resources to do that type of thing. I mean, you have to have a lawyer. I couldn't do it, and so knowing that you need to do that, having the resources to do all of that. So even if you have a really nice law on paper, that you actually then so you have to get the law, but even if you have that, it's then enforcing, or it's supporting the enforcement of that. We do a lot of that within marine protected areas and marine managed areas, where you are trying to ensure that the community's management and their fisheries rights are maintained. And sometimes it's supporting them. Okay, how do you have an agreement with the government so when the outside fishing boats are coming in, the government helps you deal with them, or whatever it is. But there's a lot this is how we're going to do it to actually reach basically any of the goals we'd like to have by 2030 and beyond. So with that, we're coming close to the end, but I'm going to give Terence the microphone. Maybe we can, if there are some questions or comments, and then Lucy, can I ask you to have you wrap up? Okay, does that work?
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So I'll go very fast. I have just to say that anyone who wants to know about the GEF SGP's engagement with Indigenous peoples, we launched this publication in 2020. It's actually 28 years of engagement, and this year will be 30 years. So this has a lot of analysis, including data on each of the regions in terms of how many projects with Indigenous peoples, how many have been directly with IPs, and how many have been with partnerships with NGOs. But I was asked today to talk about human rights and land tenure, so I will just give a very quick snapshot of a lot of discussion here at the COP around the right to a healthy, clean, and sustainable environment. So this is finding its way into the texts in various places of the GBF. David Boyd arrived today, the special rapporteur who's promoting this, and it's a set of different rights, as we heard from Carlos Manuel. It's not just land rights, but rights to clean air, not to be subject to toxic chemicals, clean water, housing, culture. There's actually a very long list of rights. As well as the procedural rights in terms of access to information and participation. In 2020, the UN Secretary General launched the call to action on human rights, and this applies to all UN agencies, as well as the GEF, of course, as part of the multilateral system. So the last 2 years, there have been a lot of coordination across this particular pillar on the rights of future generations, and you see there 3 on youth, environmental human rights defenders, and national human rights institutions. So UNDP is very involved in this one on the national human rights institutions, and I'll say a bit more about environmental human rights defenders in a second. So we had a side, Saturday was Human Rights Day, so we had a side event on this new guidance, which applies across the UN system on integrating human rights into NBSAPs. I encourage you to try to download it, but essentially it is a state's responsibility to involve and represent human rights in NBSAPs, including all of that participation that I just referred to. And there's an early action support grant that the GEF is supporting through UNDP and UNEP, which will update NBSAPs, including some of these things as well as spatial. There's not time to go into this, but this report was a coalition of 15 different organizations which made the point not just about the biodiversity found in Indigenous peoples' lands, but also the land rights. And so there's been a big push around this over the last couple of years. I won't talk about this initiative. This was something we built onto the GEF funding with the government of Germany to expand recognition of, and we'll have an event tomorrow to launch a new phase with Germany. Here, so I just have 2 more slides, I think, and this is around environmental human rights defenders. So Target 21 is around participation and so on. So there's a possibility that environmental human rights defenders will be one of the indicators in this. However, UNEP has a policy on this. So UNEP and the Office of the High Commission on Human Rights have developed guidance for the UN system as a whole. And so irrespective of what happens in the CBD negotiations, this guidance to the UN resident coordinators is now being rolled out and will be over the next couple of years. And finally, just to say that with the IPAG and support from Lucy, Giovanni, all of the IPAG members, we're looking forward to the next round of the Indigenous Peoples Fellowship, including with other GEF agencies such as CI and whoever else would like to support this nascent and growing. These are some of the Indigenous fellows that the SGP was able to support. Edith is here. Some of you may know her. So thank you very much for that, and look forward to any discussion.
Yeah, you did not a marathon, a sprint. Terence did a great job, and it's really exciting to see how we've been able to build on it's the GEF Small Grants Program, which can catch on to that, that has also then built on with support from some other donors onto this idea, but also that I'll note that in countries with Indigenous peoples, 40% of GEF small grants go to Indigenous organizations. 30%? Oh, sorry. I'm getting that fact right. I need to correct my facts. So, Lucy, I will leave it up to you if you want to end, or we can take a few comments from the front.
How many minutes do we have? Okay. So thank you, Terence, because at least that was a marathon like our marathon runners from Kenya. And I think he went a bit faster, which was also very good. We're trying to look and really digest, but I'm very glad that you are able to remember to present to us about the fellows, because that is one of the other things that really made a lot of impact in terms of looking at IPAG and also looking at the small grants program. It was able to bring up some of the fellows to really come to understand some of the issues, and up to date they are still going on. So thank you so much for that presentation. A small grants program is always somewhere special within us. Can I open the floor for a few 2 minutes, 3 minutes? Some ladies waiting here, yeah.
Skyze Denise Zakoze. Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished guests, my name is Marlene Hale, and I am from the Wet'suwet'en Nation, which is in northern British Columbia, and it is my people today for the last 5 days. You talk about land rights, Indigenous peoples, Indigenous rights. We've been celebrating, even though we've got 22,000 square kilometers of land that has been January the 8th of 2019, when the Coastal GasLink came in and put a pipeline through our territory. And still today it is a battle with us. But we move on. And by moving on, for the last 5 days, we've been celebrating a famous Supreme Court land case called the Demelgamuth-Gasteway court case. And it is on Indigenous lands, titles, and rights. It is something we hold very precious to us. And it is something that I am so proud of, because my mother in 1977, her name was Guhe, she was a chief, she stood up for her land, her people. And she was 95 when she left, and would be appalled knowing that what we are going through today is where she was as a trapper and lived off the land. And that long ago has been fighting for our rights. We were not even born. Now today I'm here listening to so many things at COP15 and very interested in knowing more about your organization, the great things that you do, no matter what part of the world. We all suffer the same fate. We're all Indigenous. We all understand we have no time left. I don't know what COP15 is going to do for us. I would only like to know one thing as an Indigenous Canadian, that above everything that we do for our lands, rights, titles, who we are, the respect. In our region, it's called the Wagoose. We hold respect, and we need respect from the governments up, down. Where decisions like this, what you're doing, and you're talking on what you're doing on GEF, is something I would love to know more about, because something I'd like to instill with our people, our nation, our area, and Canada. Because together we can still, I hold a worldwide webinar, and we can all have this conversation anytime. I work with Africa, Uganda, and all over the world, the 23 countries of the Latin Americas, and dealing with the same situation. No matter what part of the land we are the Brazil of the North, and we're losing all of our resources and our rights. And so I was really a part of listening to this. I'm a speed writer, but not that fast, because you talked a little too fast. But you got a book, and I could take that with me and learn more about what you guys are doing. And Masai.
Yes, thank you very much for that remark. Actually, it's just like trying to add on what we were speaking about. And that's why Sarah also gave the website, so that you can read more and be able to understand more on what Indigenous people will be doing in this inclusive conservation. And I tell you, most of the work that will be there is on land. Because as you say, when it started, even in Canada, when your mom started fighting it, and may God rest her soul in peace, is that the same issues are still there up to today. And for Indigenous people, we have to continue talking about them. We have to continue discussing about them, because even though we have a population now, increasing population, the young people behind us also are facing the same problem. They are also demanding for the rights of their lands and so on. At the same time, we have another monster there that is looking for those lands to do mining, to do different things, and to pollute the land and so on. So we have to keep on demanding for our rights. You ask a very good question. What do we leave from here? We are all looking forward. We live here with a strategic plan, a document that is going to help us to look our way forward, to start implementing it and break it down when we reach our communities and look at what steps do we take. And that's why indigenous people and local communities keep on discussing for that recognition. And we are happy that the Canadian government is now recognizing indigenous people and has put in a lot of funding for that. So it's a step that needs also to be guided and needs also to be coordinated, and for you all to work collectively together, because for indigenous people, collective process is very, very crucial. So this is what I can say, and indeed, getting this document will also guide you, and reading more and trying to see what can be done is going to be a step ahead for you, okay? Yeah, so feel motivated, feel happy that we are here discussing it.
And not to take the mic from Lucy, but you actually give us a really nice opportunity to mention the fact that the GEF Assembly, which is our once every 4-year big gathering, will be held in Vancouver this summer. And the plan, I think the same team that's supposed to coordinate it from the Canadian government might be a little busy right now around here. But the plan is to be co-hosting with First Nations. They haven't provided us all the details on that, but we have not done much. We haven't started, but we have a lot of interest in doing some really wanting to spend time and share and bring together different groups and do something a little different. We've been challenged to have an unconventional convention by our CEO. And so it would be great to work with you on that, because our plan is, I think we're going to hopefully have our first meeting of the actual steering committee for the Inclusive Conservation Initiative. We want to bring together these leaders with your leaders. There's a lot to learn there. You know, there's some really incredible examples. The Great Bear Rainforest. There's a group up there that has been a partner with our Amazon Sustainable Landscape program. And so I'm excited that I think we're going to be able to be doing some really interesting things. Okay.
I would love to introduce myself, and then I've got my paperwork for each.
Thank you. Okay. I think that's all. So I don't know if anyone else. Are we going to make Yoko stand up? We'll just, recognize that and note. So Yoko, the head of the GEF Small Grants Program, who's here. She used to be part of the GEF Indigenous Peoples team when she was at the big GEF, and so and was, I think, very key in getting this new the Indigenous Peoples Fellowship go up and going with Terence, which has been a really important avenue to really provide direct support to specific leaders and help them grow and offer them opportunities within this area. So,
Yes, and for Yoko, I want to really thank you so much, because this IPAG, we ran around together very much, and really we appreciate your work, and it's really great that you're here still supporting us and so on. Can we have the last question before we close? Anyone who has, yeah.
Thank you very much. Just a comment and maybe a suggestion. There is a new approach called biocultural rights, very related with land rights, and I don't know if the GEF is thinking to address it, and the UNDP and other international bodies are thinking in how to work with that, because for us as indigenous peoples and local communities is crucial because we cannot to separate nature and culture, and biocultural rights is the the right definition to all of us. Thank you.
Well, in relation to that, well, maybe I can say as my last parting word is that the 80% biodiversity that coincides with indigenous peoples' territories serves as the heart of the planet. You destroy that heart, and you will destroy the planet in the same way as when you destroy a person's heart, then you cause his death. Thank you.
And let's all know that, as you say, nature is part of us, and nature, we are both coexisting within a natural system, which is very crucial. We cannot do without nature. If there is no nature, we are dead, we are gone, because it's the air, it's everything, and so on. And that's how God made us all to live and coexist together. So let's try as much as possible to save our biodiversity, to restore our ecosystems, and to make sure that even the remotest communities and also the future ahead of us can also be able to benefit to what we have today.
Just to give a plug to the Nature Culture Summit, which just happened. So this is the 4th or the 5th Nature Culture Summit at COP, so there's a lot of rich material from that. And I think the word biocultural is creeping into lots of things, and I would add that nature-based solutions must be balanced with culture-based solutions. So biocultural, nature-based solutions.
Okay, thank you all for coming. Thank you, it's a great pleasure, and we hope that you continue following up the process. The week has just started, and life is, we are still hoping for the best as positive thinkers that will get the strategic plan. Thank you. Have a good time.